Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to another edition of Canada Talks. I'm joined in the studio by my friend and esteemed colleague, Martin Singh.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Baji, as always, it's a pleasure to be back.
Welcome back, Baji. Welcome back. It's wonderful to have you again as on our show. Actually, just before filming, we were discussing about post-secondary education, which is the topic of our show, right? And you're saying how quiet it is at home. Right?
Yes.
Maybe let's lead off with that. How so silent it is at home.
Yeah. So quite right. Like my children are just a few years older than yours, and so they're all away at university and that sort of thing. And it's fascinating because even though they're away and in their program, literally I have conversations about post-secondary choices with children in our own faith community and other communities, basically continuously. And that's as a result of the work that I do through the Cadet Corps and also with the Canadian SIKH Marching Band. And it's a pleasure to chat with them, and I try to give them the best direction that I can, unfiltered, as it were, as though they were my own children. But it's challenging because there are dreams that parents have that don't align with children's ability, or they make poor choices and that sort of thing. And so I think maybe in today's show here, we're going to try to provide at least a little bit of guidance for our brothers and sisters here in Canada to be able to allow them to choose more wisely.
Yeah, I mean, though this is obviously filmed in Canada in a Canadian context, I think it does translate to other countries as well when children hit the age, when they hit the teens, as it were, right?
For sure.
But you mentioned about dreams aligning. I mean, maybe you want to expand on that. I know that some of the work you do with some of the other children in our community as well.
Yeah. So one of the huge challenges that we have is that, I mean, of course, every parent wants the best for their child. And how does this manifest itself with respect to post-secondary education? Doctor, engineer, more recently lawyer, and those are basically the three that they gun for. And it generates a huge amount of missed opportunity because, quite frankly, most folks don't become a doctor. And even though I say that, many parents will still think that their son or daughter is the one that's going to become. And that's fine if they want to go for it. But the challenge is that they make less than good choices, given that many of them won't make it into medical school and become a doctor in the front end. So I'll give you a couple examples. So you can have science degrees, and I should share with our audience too that the basis that we're using for these particular discussions is employability post-graduation, because it's lovely to study a degree and this, that, and sort of thing, but if you study at university and graduate and can't get a job, then you basically more or less have an expensive piece of paper granted to you by a university here in Canada. And what we want is that we want our children to be able to, on graduation, not just get a job, but have a career in the field in which they, studied, so that the years that they spent and the money, because it's significant money that's been spent by the family, has gone to good use. So to start that, it may shock people to hear that most science degrees are now trash, meaning that if a person goes to study biology or chemistry, and I feel badly about this because chemistry is my first degree as well, but the problem existed then too, and I'll share my own story on that. Unless folks are interested in getting like a PhD in biology and spending all those years and getting a job as a university professor or a professional researcher, then your biology or chemistry degree, what's it good for? Like you're literally not getting a job as a biologist. You're not getting a job as a chemist with an undergraduate level degree. And so unless you're an absolute topper in either one of those degrees and you're using it as a platform to go on to medical school or something else of that nature, or graduate studies, then the degree is useless, tragically. So our viewers at home are probably going to be saying to themselves, well, you didn't mention physics. Where does physics lie? Physics is an interesting one. undergraduate level physics degrees are also largely not marketable in today's workforce, which is sad. But if you're really good at it and you're really good, and it has more to do with the mathematics than it does with the actual understanding of physics per se, there are different businesses outside of the physics domain that will pick you up. So you'll have a number of different companies that pick up, masters or PhDs in physics, further ability to manipulate mathematics in like hedge funds, investment companies, and that sort of thing. And there is good money to be earned there. And so I guess it's a solid, safety net, in that particular area. Again, you're not working in physics. Particularly, but it works in that regard, and so tragically, that's a challenge.
So I want to bring you a little back.
Sure.
Is the point of when someone hits their teens and they're looking at post-secondary education, right? What is it that you advise people to look for, right? You mentioned employability, and then obviously you went through the sciences, and some of them may be more employable than others. Here in Canada anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. So what is it at the teens they should be looking for or thinking about?
Well, I dare say that it absolutely would be employability, because for all the reasons mentioned earlier. I mean, you don't want to go through years of university and come at the back end and have nothing. And what's interesting now is that universities, of course, have caught on to this. They've caught on to the fact that there is a dream about med school, and there's money to be made in drawing people in. And so you have, it's basically just a biology degree again, with maybe some specifications. But now they've started marking biomedical degrees. With, of course, the medical word being directly used in there. For what purpose? Because they're building the dream, and so you'll have universities that will bring in 750 students into first year of this biomedical degree, and they'll make it extremely hard. A lot of the kids will get filtered out and will end up moving on to other degrees anyways, so they've kind of more or less wasted that first year to a certain extent. But even if all this 750 children went through all 4 years and all graduated, the 750 are not getting into med school. And if you don't get into med school, what do you do with a biomedical degree? You do nothing. Tragically, right? You put it up on your wall, and people praise you, and you get your graduation photos and this, that, and the other thing. And of course, you make great friends and have a network and that sort of thing from where you lived in residence or your classmates and this and that sort of thing. But it's really a dead end. And what's fascinating, of course, this is different in different countries in the world, but in Canada, people believe that you need a science degree to go into medical school, and that's entirely not the case. You could have a degree in music, and so long as you take the science electives, if you get high enough marks, you could actually go into medicine and be accepted for medicine with a fine arts degree in music. And so there's a huge disconnect that exists here in terms of people's perceptions of what actually is and what they think it is, tragically.
Just finishing the medical theme for a bit, right?
Sure.
It seems to be, and we're talking about post-secondary education, we're looking at teens, but we're also thinking about foreign trained professionals as well, right? To get into medical school in Canada, how difficult, how competitive is it, is probably a better way of putting it.
You mean for students that are applying to get into medical school from outside the country?
Outside the country, or even within the country.
Yeah, I wouldn't even bother. I wouldn't even waste my time. There are other so you're talking about maybe about students who are residing and living in India who are interested in potentially coming here and doing medical school in Canada. Oh, there are so many other countries through which they could go. That would be a much easier path. They might not be able to work here in Canada after they get their degree in Ireland or Ukraine or the Caribbean or wherever the case may be. But yeah, trying to get into medical school here in Canada is near impossible unless there's a special arrangement with a university to hold a certain number of spots. But you would know if you're in that particular cohort or not prior to making the application.
And even for teenagers or people within Canada to get into med school, how competitive is it? Just for people within Canada. So.
Yeah, well, it's extremely competitive now. Like when we have a chat about this, most of the discussion comes down around marks, and we have many people in our community who are exceptionally good students and they get great marks, but it's not just about good marks. It's about being active in your community. It's about doing volunteer work. It's about job shadowing doctors or doing job shadowing or volunteer work at a hospital. Like there's a whole cohort of things that you're really going to want to plug into there aside from marks. And I should add the MCAT exam as well, because that's primarily academic based. So it's not always the case, but I'll make the assumption that if you're a good student getting good marks in university, then you should be able to do well on the MCAT exam as well, so long as you prepare for it. But it's those other pieces, and I have kids that come up to me, they're in grade 8 or grade 9, and they're like, I want to become a cardiologist, and that's great, and I ask them, what are their marks like? And they say, I have like a 90 plus average. I said, that's a great start. What else do you do? And they're like, I do nothing, because I sit at home and I study all day. And I say, well, that's going to work against you probably when it comes time for you to do your application. Just as an example, one of the other tests that, not every medical school requires it, but it's the Casper test. It was invented by McMaster University, not far away from us here in Hamilton, Ontario. And it's a test. You can kind of study and prepare for it, but it's a bit of a challenge, because it's more of a, when I read through the questions and the answers that they're looking for, it's more to do with maturity level than it is to do with academics necessarily, and good judgment and thinking about social justice and that type of thing. So if folks are simply locked up in their room, with the idea that they have to get the highest marks possible, and then that's going to guarantee them a spot in medical school, it's not the case at all. And I'll go a step further. If you happen to be one of those children who's doing really, really well and has all the other things put together, be wise about your choice of university. One of my son's very good friends, she was literally the top student in her school. She was recruited by all the very best universities, including the University of Toronto, and she ended up not selecting that particular university in favor of another one. Why? Because she knows that some universities make their programs artificially harder to back the name behind the school, and she didn't want to get punished in that regard with respect to her marks, because she felt it would have negatively impact her ability to make the application. And so where I'm going with this is, parents, be wise about, where you choose to send your kids for university. It's not always about the name or the most prestigious place. Be smart about the quality of the program that your child's going into, and what the broader set of goals are when making that choice and selection.
We talked about medical school. There is still medical engineer, doctor. We had the right at the top of the show, right, as aspirations. But how realistic is it for every, there's a big push in the community for those three professions, right? Everyone wants their children to be, it mostly tends to be first generation, who really want their children to sort of come out as engineer, doctor, lawyer. But have you seen a change in that, or do you see the children that you work with still being pushed by their parents to go down those three professions? Yeah,
and when I say this, I don't want the parents to feel that they are necessarily doing something wrong or not making wise choices for their children. They're your children. You are their parents, and whatever choices you make, will be the right one. I guess what we're trying to do here is provide, some, help in terms of making sure that the choices are the best possible choices for your child. And engineering as a profession generally still works well. truth be told, my second degree was an engineering degree. I would have, if I would have chosen to stay in that particular career path, I wouldn't have had any difficulty getting a job and that sort of thing. I'm not so sure if an engineer graduate these days are going to be able to afford a house here in the GTA, but that might be a discussion on a different show. But yeah, it works well. But it's interesting because there's all kinds of perception issues between, the doctor, engineer, lawyer that you spoke of, and how attainable they are, and the very sharp contrast with, say, a carpenter, plumber, and an electrician. And added on top of that are caste issues and that sort of thing, whereby people view certain particular occupations as attached to particular castes, which should not be the case in our Sikh community, because those folks who go into community college and do the trades, like carpenter, electrician, plumber, and that sort of thing, HVAC would be another one, literally they have 100% placement after graduation, and they're making great money. And it's because the building trades here are going continuously
short-staffed, is that?
Well, yeah, like they are desperate, and this desperation is right across the country. Here in Ontario, they say that they need another 1 million houses. Like, can you even imagine that? Like, I can't even conceive of what that would look like.
No.
We don't even have 1 million people in Brampton here where we're sitting, but yet they need a million more houses here in Ontario in the next number of years. And then in Nova Scotia, my brother wanted to get his kitchen cabinets, changed up in his house, and he had to wait 8 months. A friend of his wanted to, hire a contractor to get the house built. The contractor said, I can't even take a deposit from you because I'm not starting your house in like 20 to 24 months. And it's entirely because they don't have those people, the trained tradespeople, in order to make that work. But you have a discussion with many folks in our community about community college and the programs there as opposed to university, and literally for most of them it's almost a brick wall. It's almost a brick wall. Like, the child has to have a particularly open discussion type relationship with their parents, and the parents have to be particularly good at listening in order to make that work. And I've had parents tell me that they said, Martin Singh, what you're telling my kids is trash, right? Which is certainly they're allowed to do, and no doubt we'll get commentary, on this show saying that my advice is trash as well. But and that's fine. But yeah, it's really interesting how the perceptions in our community are driving folks in a few different directions, potentially to their detriment from a job placement perspective.
I want to look at something else here, is the kids' interest versus the parents' aspirations, and that tension that can happen. Have you come across that at all?
Yeah, there's some of that, but what it is that, how shall I put it? I'm not advocating for children to be able to run off and just study whatever they want. Like if I had someone who came to me and said, I absolutely want to do a history degree because I really love 20th century American history and I want to do an undergraduate in that, I'd be like, okay, that concerns me because I think you're going to be working in a restaurant as a waiter after you graduate. But by contrast, I had one student and she came to me and she said, not only am I doing an undergraduate degree in history, I'm doing my master's in Mesoamerican history, and I'm looking to do a PhD in that particular area as well, because I also know photography very well, and I'm gunning for a job with National Geographic. And I'm like, okay, that's a different case, here's somebody, with a particular plan, and she's a brilliant kid, and so she said, here's why I've made these particular choices, and this is why the choices make sense. And so she found a niche area for herself where there are jobs, not many jobs, mind you, but not many people are going to go down that particular path to make that work. There's another young girl that I know. She came to me and she said, you know, Martin, like I really like working with my hands, but you know, my parents are interested in having me do a university degree. How can we put these two things together? So I said, well, you know, what in particular do you like doing? She said, well, I love working with fabric and stitching things together and that sort of thing. And so not that I recommend Ryerson University for much of anything, but they have one program there where you can do a degree. I believe is interior design, and that's where she's interested in going. And I said that works. Like it's to her interest. It's what she wants to do. Certainly, it's a competitive environment out there, but. It is the only university program that I know of in Canada for that particular program, and so it's a small number of people trained at that level that you're going to be competing with, and so yeah, like I think she's going to do very well, and good on her. But that's the difference. Like that's a plan, right? You know?
So actually, I'm going to take issue with that because I went to Ryerson.
That's fine.
And I've done engineering at Ryerson.
Yeah, not a fan, but that's okay. And that's part of the good part of our show, right? Is that we don't necessarily need to agree.
No, I know. Engineering at Ryerson actually is very good. It is very practical. But I'm talking a few years back, not that many years back, mind you.
Sure.
but it's very practical, and the employers used to like that because it was practical engineering at that time.
Yeah.
Right. But things have changed since then, right? So you talked about skilled trades. There's one other profession that is very, very popular amongst our community, and that is law, right? And I do see a number of people coming to law. We only got about 4 or 5 minutes, but if you want to briefly touch on that, because it's a bit different in the UK. In the UK, people actually go
directly after high school, and I tell you, we have many of our young people that study in the UK, and they do it, you know, to finish their law degree in say 3 years or whatever the case may be. They come back, and are they successful in clearing the bar exams and that sort of thing in Canada? Yes. Are they able to get jobs as lawyers? Yeah, they are. But I would argue that the most successful lawyers that you see in our community, I'm not even saying from a monetary perspective because that's difficult to judge, but I would say from a career perspective, are those that actually do it here. Now, I can't share with you what the reason is for that necessarily, but the children that I advise on this particular one, I encourage them to stay at home on this one. I encourage them to follow the regular Canadian pathway that the overwhelming majority of Canadian lawyers take. Because the undergraduate degree provides them with the background. So I'll give you an example. There's one extremely bright young woman that we have in our cadet corps, and she's also in the band actually, and she's interested in studying law and possibly going into corporate law. And so I said, well, if that's what you want to go into, be smart about what you do for your undergraduate degree. Be smart what you do for your high school courses. And so we put together a cohort of courses for her in grade 11 and grade 12, where she's going to be, doing a couple of the business courses there. She's going to be doing accounting. She's looking to do an undergraduate degree, probably at York actually, for her her undergraduate degree in accounting or business. And then the plan is to use that as the platform to go on and do law. But she has all this really fantastic background she'll have all this fantastic background in terms of how to, read, financial statements and that sort of thing. And I said to her, you're meant for big things. Like, you're not just going to stay a lawyer. You should be, looking to become a judge one day. Or if you do the corporate law thing and follow it through, all of this business background and accounting is really going to help you come time when you're, 5, 10, or 15 years into your career and you want to go back to school and get your MBA. You'll be that much further ahead. And so it's not so much choosing a particular pathway, Paji, as much as it is making sure that there's an identifiable plan and that sort of thing. And that's why I try to work with the kids. And so, I bashed biology degrees here at the beginning of the show, but I'll come back to it. If someone came back to me and they said, I want to become a marine biologist, and that's what I want my job to be, then I'm like, okay, an undergraduate degree in biology is exactly where you want to go. Again, I'm not exactly sure, you know, what the job placement is, but there are certainly jobs out there for that. I mean, the one that comes to mind mostly for me, and this is, you know, betraying, not really betraying, but, you know, exposing my East Coast roots, would be the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. They would certainly have, you know, folks with that kind of background there, and the federal government would have other areas as well, you know, in the Department of the Environment and that sort of thing, where, you know, PhDs and maybe even master's degrees in the sciences would work. But it's making sure that you sit down with your child and work cooperatively together with them to find a pathway that works. And particularly if you're aiming, you know, higher, or what's perceived to be higher, like for medical school and that type of thing, that the undergraduate degree that's being done meets their interests so that they work and do extremely well in it, but also maybe serves as some kind of safety net. And so what I share with folks, I said the fine arts one, you know, earlier, but perhaps, you know, they could go and study nursing as their undergraduate degree. So if they don't get into medicine, then they're able to, you know, practice as a nurse, and nurses have 100% job placement, like literally 100% job placement.
Fun. Baji, it's been a pleasure again, because we've run out of time. All right, getting signals from Jaspal Singh that we've run out of time. So
might have to do a second show on this one. Yeah,
we may have to come back to this at some point. I think it might be useful to come back to this at some point, because it's a key aspect that parents go through. We're in. I mean, your children now, mine's going into post-secondary education next year, so it's a key aspect. But thank you very much. And needless to say, we just wish our viewers a wonderful week. Until next time, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.